In this short video, we're going to try and answer the question, what do we really know about St. George? And that's not going to be easy because there are lots of stories about him and we can't promise you that everything we'll tell you will be 100% true, but like good scouts, we're going to do our best. The tale is going to take us back in time, more than 2,000 years, and all across Europe, the Middle East, and even North Africa. But as we can't really leave home at the moment, how are we going to do that? There's only one way to travel across all of time and space, and that's to imagine that we have a time machine. To make sure that we know it's our time machine, we're going to have to change the colour to Scout Purple. So everybody focus. Yes, there we are. And now everybody's going to have to squash in because we have more than 6,000 young people to get in here and more than 1,500 adults. And as you young people know, adults take up a lot of room. So everyone, take a deep breath, squeeze in, and remember, it's bigger on the inside. Travel back to the beginning. From where we are now in the northeast of England in the year 2020. Is everybody ready? And we can imagine that we've arrived in a time when Jesus was born, when Jesus lived and Jesus died, in the Middle East at the start of Christianity. And as we'll see, Christianity played a big part in the real story of St. George. We know a lot about George's early life. According to stories told by the Greeks, and you can see modern day Greece here in pink on the map, George's parents were Greek Christians. He came from a fairly wealthy family and his father was an official in the Roman army. Now we're travelling again. I think we're going to have to set that to silent. But anyway, we've arrived sometime around the year 280 AD when George was born. And we believe that he was born in a place called Cappadocia, which is in the middle of modern day Turkey in a very hot and dry part of the country. Although the borders between Greece and Turkey were very different back when George was born, that's why we say George was actually Turkish. And when he was around 14 years of age, his father died and George moved with his mother back to Syria, which is where she originally came from. Again, we don't know a lot about George's life as an adult. We do believe that he was a soldier in the Roman army, joining around the age of 17. And we've travelled now to the year 300 AD, where George has become a Roman military tribune. That means that he was very wealthy and important. Tribunes were elected every year and many went on to be very important in the Roman government. But they also commanded large parts of the Roman army, which was very important in controlling the Roman Empire. So we've now moved forward just a few years to 303 AD. And the Roman government saw the growth of Christianity as a threat to their way of life. Many Christians were persecuted or bullied for what they believed, and some were even killed. In February that year, the emperor said that all soldiers who were Christians should have their rank taken away from them, and that all soldiers should make sacrifices to the old Roman gods. Now, George refused to persecute or bully his fellow Christians. He gave all his money to the poor, and he told the Roman Emperor that he, George, was also a Christian. And it's believed that George was then tortured, but he refused to change his mind and give up his beliefs. And he was killed on the 23rd of April, 303, which is why we remember him on St. George's Day, today, the 23rd of April, every year. Now, you've all heard of St. George and the Dragon, how he saved the life of a princess. He rescued the people of the town by fighting and killing a dragon. And there were lots of stories about heroes fighting dragons. One of the earliest of these came from Libya in North Africa, but similar stories were told over Europe and England. And in the 11th and 12th century, where we are now, almost 1,000 years ago, these stories became associated with St. George, although it's unlikely that the real George ever fought or killed a dragon. But these stories reached Europe, and the story of George and the Dragon was born. Stories about George first came to England in the 5th and 6th century, and George was venerated, or well liked and respected, because he died for his faith. And we also liked the story about the dragon, of course, because we'd had lots of similar stories in England already. And when the English and French kings travelled to the Middle East to take back the Holy Land from the Saracens, they told stories of St. George going into battle with them, which is why we sometimes think of St. George as a knight or a crusader on a horse. And in the year 1350, which is where we are now, back in England, King Edward III made St. George the patron saint of England, which is why the flag of England is the cross of St. George. We've stayed in England, but we've travelled forward in time again to the year 1907, when Baden-Powell started the Scouts and wrote his famous book, Scouting for Boys. He referred to King Arthur and the stories about St. George being the patron saint of the Knights of the Round Table. And Baden-Powell said, George is also the patron saint of Scouts everywhere. Therefore, all Scouts should know his story. St. George is typical of what a Scout should be. Baden-Powell also said, when he was faced by a difficulty or danger, however great it appeared, even in the shape of a dragon, he did not avoid it or fear it, but went at it with all the power he could. That is exactly the way a Scout should face a difficulty or danger, no matter how great or how terrifying it may appear. They should go at it boldly and confidently, using every power that they can to try and overcome it, and the probability is that they will succeed. So let's come back to now and find out what we've learned. So now we're back home, and hopefully we know that the story of St. George is actually lots of little bits of many stories. Some of these are Christian stories from the West and the East. There are lots of Muslim stories about St. George. Some of these stories cover a period which actually spans hundreds of years, and over the last 1500 years we've seen people venerate St. George and take his stories and take ownership of them. And many countries and different cultures have their own versions of their stories of St. George, just as we have here in England and just as we have in Scouting. So who is St. George to us? We know that he was brave because he was a soldier in the Roman army. We believe that he was wealthy and important as a military tribune. We know that he was a good person. He gave all his money to poor people, and he refused to bully other Christians even when he was told to. He also died for the things that he believed in, and he held true to his beliefs and values even then. That's why every year when we renew our Scout promise, we remember St. George as a good role model to us as Scouts. thing as a dragon.